Everything collapsed in a single day. One moment, Keir Starmer was leading the Labour Party with a confident grip, strategic, unshaken, and poised for power. The next, the walls came crashing down. One by one, his most trusted allies walked out, leaving behind resignation letters soaked in anger and betrayal. But this wasn't about party politics or policy disagreements. This was something darker. A secret memo, never meant to be seen by the public, surfaced. And what it revealed shook the very foundation of Starmer's leadership. This wasn't just a scandal. This was political detonation. And for Starmer, there's no going back. The first crack appeared in silence. Late at night, an anonymous message reached a prominent journalist. It was short, it was direct, and it was devastating. Attached was a document marked "Confidential, Internal Use Only," a memo that bore the seal of the Labour Leadership Office. The journalist hesitated, uncertain whether to believe what they were reading. Plans that directly contradicted Labour's public promises, cuts that would hit the elderly, the sick and the working poor. Policy shifts that could devastate key institutions, including the National Health Service. The journalist made a call, then another. By morning, whispers turned to alarms, and by midday, the first resignation hit the news cycle. A senior figure from Starmer's inner circle, someone once fiercely loyal, stepped down. Her message to the public was damning. "I will not stand behind deception. The people deserve the truth. I refuse to participate in this betrayal." No elaboration, no questions answered. But it was enough. It cracked the dam. Hours later, more resignations followed, 3, then 6. Then a full wave of ministers vanished from Starmer's core team. It wasn't just political chaos, it was strategic collapse. These weren't fringe figures. These were architects of Starmer's rise, defecting en masse, pulling back the curtain on what had been hidden for months. Inside Parliament, confusion turned into dread. MPs rushed to group chats and private calls. Some tried to control the narrative, others demanded answers, but no one had a full picture yet, only fragments. And at the centre of it all, the memo. Though the Labour press office called the walkouts unfortunate and insisted they were due to routine disagreements, no one bought it, especially when the memo itself began to circulate among journalists and party insiders. It wasn't just controversial, it was explosive. Inside the memo were specific plans, quietly approved strategies to slash funding for education, reduce elderly care programmes, and begin discussions on partial NHS privatisation. These weren't trial balloons or early-stage ideas. The language was blunt, actionable, and, most critically, already in motion. Dates had been marked, budget codes assigned, meetings held in secret, and it had all happened before the last election. That's what turned outrage into rebellion. Voters had been promised protection, transparency, honesty, but behind closed doors a different game was being played. One focused not on serving the people, but on securing and maintaining power at all costs. The contrast was brutal, the betrayal undeniable. What made this memo even more damning was its signatories. Multiple high-ranking Labour officials had reviewed and approved its contents. Their names, typed clearly at the bottom, offered no deniability. These weren't rogue advisers. These were the architects of Starmer's leadership strategy, the ones who had stood beside him in every press conference, every televised debate, every campaign stop. Now, those same figures were gone, vanished, in the span of 24 hours. The press pounced. News anchors struggled to keep pace with the resignations. Hashtags exploded across social media. Outside Parliament, protesters began to gather. Inside, the silence from Starmer's side grew louder with every passing hour. And then, another shock. A second memo surfaced. This one detailing foreign interests involved in shaping the party's health policy. The connections were murky, but troubling. Offshore meetings, undisclosed donors, strategic partnerships crafted in complete secrecy. This was no longer just a story about betrayal, it was becoming a story about corruption. MPs who had once supported Starmer now began to distanced themselves in public. Statements were released condemning the memo. Backroom deals were disavowed. The phrase, "I had no knowledge," became the most repeated sentence in the halls of Westminster. But the damage had already been done. This wasn't just a political scandal. It was a reckoning. A purge. And at the centre of it stood Keir Starmer, isolated, exposed, and rapidly losing control. As the hours passed, it became clear that this wasn't going to blow over. What had started as a few high-profile resignations rapidly became an all-out political implosion. Starmer's once unshakable leadership crumbled under the weight of betrayal, fury, and national outrage. What made this moment so volatile wasn't just the scale of the resignations, but the emotional weight behind them. These weren't routine political departures. They were acts of protest, statements of moral defiance against a leader accused of abandoning the very values that got him. Elected, the Labour headquarters turned into a fortress. Aides rushed to lock down communications. Press staff were ordered to issue tight-lipped statements, while senior officials worked behind the scenes to plug leaks and beg MPs for loyalty. But the trust had been shattered. What remained was a vacuum of credibility. And in politics, that vacuum doesn't stay empty for long. Rivals within the party began to circle, testing the waters for a leadership challenge. Outside, the media was relentless. Every outlet, left, right, and centre, was dissecting the leaked memo and broadcasting each new resignation like a countdown to collapse. In Parliament, things descended into chaos. Emergency meetings were called as backbenchers demanded answers. Whispers of a vote of no confidence began to spread. Labour's internal messaging system was flooded with panic. Local party leaders threatening to resign, constituents demanding explanations, and donors reconsidering their support. There was no single strategy that could fix what had been broken. Starmer's authority had been eroded not by his enemies, but by those closest to him. Ministers who had helped craft the party's platform were now openly accusing him of deception. "This is not what we signed up for," one MP said in a live interview. The public deserves honesty, not this. The most shocking part, the speed. Political downfalls are often drawn-out affairs, gradual declines marked by minor controversies. But this was instant combustion. Within just 48 hours of the first resignation, Starmer's cabinet was effectively gone. No structure, no stability. Just a leader standing alone in the eye of a political storm. Social media erupted with calls for his resignation. The hashtag #Starmer must go trended for 36 hours straight. Outside Labour HQ, protesters began to gather. Some former supporters, others furious voters who felt duped by what they now believed was a well-orchestrated lie. Amid this chaos, a third document surfaced. This time, a financial spreadsheet, detailing budget reallocations tied to the policies outlined in the original memo. The spreadsheet confirmed what whistleblowers had been hinting at. Not only had these policies been discussed, they were already being enacted. NHS departments were seeing quiet funding cuts. Local councils were being asked to reassess elderly care contracts. Education grants for low-income areas were suddenly under review. The damage wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. It was happening. And it was backed by numbers, signatures, and internal timestamps that proved. These moves predated Starmer's last campaign push. More MPs began to jump ship. Their resignations were now framed not just as political acts, but moral ones. One particularly powerful letter from a senior Labour spokesperson read, "I cannot serve under a leadership that treats public trust as a disposable currency. We were elected on promises we never intended to keep. That is not democracy. That is deception." The letter was shared widely, covered across news cycles, and echoed by dozens of local officials. Labour's support base, already bruised, now fractured completely. And then came the recording. An audio file leaked by an insider, verified by multiple news organisations, captured Starmer in a closed-door meeting with advisers. Calm, strategic, unapologetic. In the recording, he spoke candidly about managing public reaction, phasing out NHS funding, without triggering headlines, and ensuring that campaign messaging stayed broad enough to offer flexibility post-election. But many, it was the final nail. This wasn't a man forced into hard decisions after taking office. This was someone who had crafted a plan to gain power by hiding the truth until it was too late to object. Political analysts began comparing the fallout to other historic collapses. Thatcher's final days, Blair's post-Iraq spiral, even parallels, to the Lib Dem wipeout following tuition fee betrayal. But this was something else. It wasn't tied to war or coalition compromise. It was rooted in internal betrayal, secrecy, and calculated manipulation. The kind of downfall that stains not just a leader, but an entire party. A betrayal that resets trust for an entire generation. As the dust continued to swirl, attention turned to Starmer himself. Would he resign? Would he fight back? His appearances became rarer. He cancelled public events. A planned address to party members was pulled at the last minute. Reports suggested crisis meetings were being held deep into the night, with close allies urging him to step down for the good of the party. But others said Starmer still believed he could weather the storm, that the public backlash would fade. That policy could be spun. That loyalty could be rebuilt, but those around him knew better. They saw the emails, the text messages, the calls from donors pulling out, the party machinery grinding to a halt, and worst of all, they saw the polls, crashing in real time as public confidence evaporated. What remained was a hollow shell of leadership. A man surrounded not by allies but by silence. This was no longer just a scandal. It was the beginning of the end, not only for Starmer, but potentially for the current Labour Party as we know it. The aftermath of the implosion was unlike anything modern British politics had witnessed. Within 72 hours, the Labour Party went from the image of a unified, election-ready force to a shattered organisation engulfed in scandal, shame, and structural collapse. News outlets devoted wall-to-wall coverage to the resignations, the memo, the recording, and the chilling details emerging from internal documents. Analysts no longer debated whether Starmer's leadership was damaged. They debated whether it would even survive the week. Political collapse, once a slow and steady erosion, now came like a landslide. What shocked observers and insiders alike was not just the speed, but the breadth. This crisis didn't just damage Starmer's top circle, it sent shockwaves down to the local party level. Constituency Labour parties, CLPs, began issuing emergency statements, distancing themselves from Starmer's leadership and calling for immediate reform. Some demanded his resignation, others went further, calling for full transparency on campaign funding, internal decision-making, and even discussions with private healthcare stakeholders. Momentum, the once dominant grassroots movement inside Labour, publicly denounced the leadership and accused it of betraying the party's foundational values. Behind the scenes, Labour HQ became a pressure cooker. Communications were in meltdown. Key staff were resigning quietly or taking leave. Legal teams began reviewing exposure risks. Several senior MPs and former ministers were reported to be seeking legal counsel as journalists filed dozens of FOI requests. The party's digital infrastructure faced coordinated cyber attacks and phishing attempts, likely triggered by the wave of chaos and leaks that now defined Labour's internal ecosystem. The Tory party, opportunistic and aggressive, wasted no time capitalising on the implosion. Conservative MPs flooded the media with condemnations. Cabinet members called it proof that Labour cannot govern, while others revived the slogan Chaos with Starmer and pushed it across social platforms. Right-wing tabloids ran front-page spreads with doctored images of Starmer shredding NHS documents. Political satire shows skewered him, and the opposition benches in Parliament thundered with derision any time Labour attempted to speak. Yet the greatest attacks didn't come from Tories, they came from within Labour's own ranks. The resignation letters now read more like indictments. MPs accused Starmer of orchestrating a hidden agenda. They detailed meetings where warnings were ignored, evidence was brushed aside, and concerns were met with indifference. One particularly damning statement by a former policy advisor claimed that the entire campaign was built on a foundation of deception, measured, deliberate, and poll-tested lies. These weren't anonymous claims. They came from respected, elected officials who had once championed Starmer as the party's best hope. Grassroots backlash spread rapidly. Local councillors began defecting to independent status. Membership cancellations surged. A secret audio call among CLP chairs leaked to the press revealed many were preparing no-confidence votes against the national leadership. "We trusted him," one chair said, "and now our constituents see us as liars too. We have to rebuild from scratch." Donations dried up overnight. Labour's largest union affiliates threatened to pull funding unless a leadership contest was announced. The party's war chest, once brimming after the last election, was now being drained to cover legal, PR and crisis management costs. Meanwhile, public anger took physical form. Protests erupted in cities across the UK. Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham and London all saw demonstrations. Outside Labour HQ, furious citizens held signs reading "Protect the NHS" and "We voted for hope, not lies." Some were former voters. Some had never voted Labour, but felt betrayed by what they now saw as another example of establishment duplicity. The party of working people, they said, had become the party of corporate deal-making behind closed doors. Public support continued to nosedive. Even mainstream Labour figures began to break rank. Prominent MPs, those still technically loyal, gave interviews suggesting clarity was needed and change may be required. Though careful with their words, the message was unmistakable. Starmer's time was running out. A poll conducted mid-crisis revealed staggering results. Over 65% of Labour voters said they no longer trusted the leadership. Even worse, more than 20% said they would now consider switching allegiance to third parties like the Greens or Liberal Democrats. Trust once lost is rarely regained. The international community took notice. Foreign media ran headlines comparing Starmer's downfall to political scandals in Europe and America. EU diplomats reportedly postponed behind-the-scenes engagements with Labour's foreign affairs team. The US Embassy in London was said to be monitoring developments closely, particularly due to the implications surrounding UK foreign aid and defence commitments. No one wanted to be caught associating with a leadership team in freefall, but perhaps most damning was the silence inside Starmer's office. After a brief, stiff public statement denying wrongdoing, he disappeared from the media landscape. No interviews, no press briefings, no rallying speech to the nation, just vague assurances through spokespersons and the occasional tweet. The absence was deafening. In the void, speculation filled the air. Was Starmer preparing to step down? Was he planning a reshuffle? Was he even still in control? Party insiders described frantic late-night meetings, endless phone calls, and the surreal image of a leader trying to cling to power as the walls caved in. Every hour brought a new revelation, a new resignation, or a fresh scandal unearthed by a journalist or anonymous whistleblower. The machine that once carried Labour to the brink of electoral victory had turned against itself, now a cannibalistic engine of destruction. And amid all this chaos, one question echoed louder than any other. What now, with Starmer's leadership? On life support, the future of the Labour Party hangs in the balance. Will a new figure rise from the ashes to rebuild trust? Will the party split, as centrists and progressives blame each other for the collapse? Or will Labour, as it has done so many times in history, find a way to regroup and re-emerge stronger? One thing is certain, this scandal has changed the party forever. The mask is off, the curtain has dropped, and whatever comes next, it will be forged not in calm policy discussions, but in the fire of political reckoning. As the weeks unfolded following the crisis, the once promising leadership of Keir Starmer came under increasing scrutiny. In the early days of his tenure, many saw him as a beacon of hope, a leader who could steer the Labour Party back into the light after years of turmoil and defeat. His calm, methodical approach, contrasted with the chaos of his predecessors, made him seem like the ideal candidate to restore Labour's reputation and power. Yet, in the wake of this devastating scandal, that promise now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by betrayal, corruption, and deception. Starmer's early years in leadership were marked by a focus on unity and stability. He attempted to heal the wounds left by the divisions of the Corbyn era, seeking to present a moderate, centrist Labour Party that could appeal to both working-class voters and the political establishment. For a time, his message resonated. His quiet strength, commitment to economic reform, and dedication to rebuilding trust seemed to resonate with the public. The election of 2020, which many thought Labour would lose decisively, had actually been one of the closest in recent history, with Starmer's careful strategy helping to restore confidence among the electorate. However, the roots of his downfall were already planted during those early years. Starmer's obsession with appeasing both sides of the political spectrum, centrists who wanted pragmatic, economic stability, and the left-wing activists who demanded bold systemic change, left him in a perilous balancing act. The compromises made to placate both factions resulted in a lack of clarity and a steady erosion of his support base. To the left of the party, he appeared too much like a caretaker leader, unwilling to challenge the system, while centrists grew increasingly uncomfortable with his failure to fully embrace their policies. This lack of clear direction contributed to a growing sense of frustration within the party. The whispers of discontent grew louder behind closed doors. There were murmurs about the party's long-term strategy, or the lack thereof. Some insiders began to see Starmer's leadership as a temporary transitional phase rather than a transformative one. His refusal to take strong positions on key issues like public sector reform, healthcare and environmental policy further alienated both his supporters and the wider electorate. The public began to see a leader who lacked conviction, someone who was more concerned with appeasing factions than enacting bold, necessary change. This sense of unease only deepened as the crisis unfolded, as Starmer's inability to address it with the clarity and leadership expected of him became more apparent by the day. In the fallout of the scandal, Starmer's once unified front collapsed, exposing the fractures in his leadership. As more ministers and aides resigned, the true extent of the betrayal became apparent. The leaked memo, detailing secret plans to cut public spending on essential services, privatise healthcare, and push austerity measures, painted a grim picture of Starmer's true agenda. What had initially seemed like a moderate, centrist approach to governing now appeared to be a calculated effort to deceive the public, to advance a hidden agenda while pretending to stand for progressive change. The very promises that Starmer had campaigned on, his commitment to protecting the NHS, safeguarding public services, and standing up for the working class, were suddenly in tatters, exposed as empty rhetoric designed to win votes, not to create real change. The media, once sympathetic to Starmer's vision of a more competent Labour Party, turned sharply against him. Commentators who had hailed him as the party's saviour now referred to him as a political failure, a man whose ambition and political calculations had led to the party's self-destruction. Analysts pointed to the disconnect between Starmer's public persona and the reality of his leadership. He had projected an image of a steady, competent figure, but behind the scenes he was revealed as someone willing to compromise his values for the sake of political expediency. The impact of this scandal reached far beyond Labour's immediate future. It sent shockwaves through the political landscape, prompting other parties to reassess their strategies. The Tories, once considered politically vulnerable due to their handling of the pandemic and their austerity measures, found new opportunities to consolidate power as Labour collapsed into infighting and public disarray. With the Labour Party now in disarray, many pundits speculated about the rise of new political movements, potentially taking advantage of the vacuum left by Starmer's crumbling leadership. The public, once cautiously optimistic about Labour's return to power, now found themselves turning to alternatives, Greens, Liberal Democrats, and even smaller independent parties. As Labour descended into chaos, questions about Starmer's future grew louder. Could he survive the crisis? Was his position as leader truly secure? The mounting pressure began to show, with Starmer appearing more defensive and isolated in public. His once strong communication skills now seemed to falter. His response to the scandal was seen as inadequate, with many accusing him of avoiding direct confrontation with the media and party members. The public's trust in his ability to lead had been shattered, and no amount of spin could cover up the scale of the betrayal. Inside Labour's ranks, whispers of a leadership challenge became more frequent. Some MPs began openly calling for a new leader to take the reins, someone who could unite the party and restore public confidence. Speculations swirled around potential challengers, with names like Angela Rayner, Lisa Nandy, and even Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves being floated as possible replacements. However, many of these potential challengers were reluctant to take on the mantle while the party was in such turmoil. Their hesitation only deepened the sense of uncertainty and fragmentation within the Labour Party. What was clear, however, was that Starmer's legacy, once poised to be defined by a commitment to reform and unity, was now marked by scandal and distrust. His downfall was not just a political defeat, it was the end of an era for Labour. What was once a party of the people, striving for justice and progress, had become mired in secrets, lies, and backroom deals. The future of the Labour Party now lay in the hands of those who would rebuild from the ashes of this crisis. But whether they could reclaim the trust of the public, or whether the damage done to the party's reputation was too great, remained to be seen.